Good morning all. Last class we have understood what is ETL process and how does Informatica architecture looks, right? So in this class we'll try to see practically all these components and we'll try to get introduced to the Informatica tools, right? So I have installed Informatica server component and client component. So both the components are installed in this machine. See Informatica 9.1. So I have the server component here and I have the client component as well. So both the components are installed in this machine. So let's get started with the server component. See, as discussed in the earlier classes, right? So Informatica administrator homepage is available for the administrator to do the administrative tasks. So let's have a look at the tool. See, so you need to provide username and password. So this is password and username protected web page, right? So after you log in, see, administrator will be able to, you know, create all these services, right? So he can create a folder, he can create a node, grid, you know, uh, power center repository service, integration service, and the other services as well. See, there are many other services which are available here, but repository service and integration services are mandatory to create the code and to execute the code, right? But other services, it's based on the requirement, right? So, and also, see, Informatica administrator can verify the logs here. He can monitor the tasks running on the Informatica server, and he can see the reports, and he can also monitor the security operations like creating the users, creating the groups, revoking the permissions, and giving the permissions, etc. can be done by the administrator using this particular Informatica administrator tool, admin console tool, right? So here on this server, see, there is a repository created by name repo, and the repository service also created for this repository, and there is an integration service also created, right? So the repository service, see, I'll just show you. So we have discussed repository can be created only on the database, right? See the database properties. So on this database XE, see, on this database XE, the the repository is created, and this is the repository service created for that particular repository, right? The name of the repository is repo, right? And integration service is also created. See, the integration service is created for repository repo, right? So repository and repository service and integration service both are created on this machine, right? So now let's go to the client tools. So when we go to client tools, power center client tools, see, the four tools are available here: power center designer, power center repository manager, power center workflow manager, and power center workflow monitor. So these are the four tools available for the developer to do the development, right? So let's start with the repository manager. So this is how the tool looks, right? So this part, this part of the tool is called as navigator window, where you can see the code which is available in the repository in this part. So this is the output window, so where you will get the notifications and other information, and this is the workspace where you actually do the design, right? So this part is common for all the carriers. See, I'll just open the other window, Informatica designer. See, you can move across. See, you can go to repository manager, you can go to designer, you can go to workflow manager. See, you can skip the tools like this, right? So when I have opened the designer, see, designer also has same kind of setup here. So navigator window, output window, and the workspace, right? So let's close this as of now. So now I have created the repository on the server, right? So the instance of the repository has to be brought to the client windows, right? So let us see how we can bring the instance of the repository to the client windows. See, go to repository, say configure domains. See, I have already configured the domain. All you need to do is, I'll just show you. See, you say add a domain, give the domain name and give the host name and give the port number. See, port number is 6005 by default, right? You can give that, or 6008 it should be, right? So give the name of the machine, give the domain name and give the port number, right? So if you give that information, see, the domain name is domain underscore kavya underscore kavya hyphen pc for this machine. So when I give all those information and say okay, so it will just show me the repositories available on that particular domain. So on this domain I have a repository by name repo which is already created. I'll just select it and say okay, which will bring the instance of the repository to my client windows. So it's not only to this window. So when I do the configuration in this repository manager, so I'll be able to see this repository in all the other windows. So let me open the other window now. See, I'm going to open the designer window now. See, the designer window also has the repository bot, right? See, the repository is available here. So let me just close it now, right? So now let's discuss about repository manager. So using repository manager, basically you can manage the repositories. So you have just seen, right, how did I bought the instance of the repository to the client window. So when I bring that instance to the to repository manager, automatically all the other windows will be reflected with this change. So let me just delete it. See, I have just deleted it, right? Let me go to the designer again now. See, now I'm not able to see the repository here, right? So this way I can configure or remove the repositories from this window, which will be reflected in all the other windows. So basically this repository manager window is used to manage the repositories, right? So I have created the repository now. I have bought the instance of the repository to client window now. So this also needs, username and password to connect to the repository. Just provide the username and password. So I have provided the username and password, so which has, so connected to the repository, and it's showing all the code which is available in the repository to me. So there are many folders available in the repository, right? See, there are many folders available in the repository, and each folder there is some code which is available, which was, created earlier. So this way, so to whichever folders I have permissions, I'll be able to see the code, right? So these folders are basically to manage the code, right? So when I have a project and when I have, many modules in the project, so how do I manage the code? So if I put all the, all the code which belongs to multiple modules in a single place, so I'll not be able to manage the code, right? So basically here you can create multiple folders for, you know uh, multiple modules, and you can manage the code. It's something like you have schemas in the database, right? So it's something like you have folders here in the Informatica. See, I can create a new folder here. See, for this batch I'm going to create a new folder. Going forward we are going to, you know do all our practical sessions in this particular folder. So I'm just creating it as batch 32. So using repository manager, I can bring the instance of the repository, and also I can create the folder, you know, folder in the repository, and also give the permissions to the users for this folder in the repository, right? So I'm just creating the batch, creating the folder. See, I have just created the folder, and I don't have any code available in this folder. right? So using repository manager, I can bring the instance of the repository to the client windows. Also, I can create the folder and manage the folder. See, I can create, edit, and delete the folders. So along with these options, I can also do the code migration. So code movement from one folder to the other folder, or from one repository to the other repository. So right now I have only one repository available here. I may have multiple repositories available. So one repository for development. So in the real time, you may have multiple repositories. So one for the development and other for the UAT and other for the production. So you do the development in the development repository. Once the development is done, you move the code to UAT environment, and once the testing is done, you can move the code to production environment. So you may have multiple repositories. So using repository manager, you can also do the code movement, right? So this we can see in the later classes. The code movement we can see in the later classes, right? So this is about repository manager. Now let's move on to Informatica Power Center Designer, right? So Informatica Power Center Designer also looks similar like repository manager, whereas you have a navigator window and you have output window and also the workspace, right? So let me just connect to the database, connect to the repository. So now I have connected to the repository. See, I'm able to see the folder which is available, which is created in the repository manager. So now let me just connect to the folder. See, right click and say open. So now I am connected to this particular folder. See, to this particular folder I have connected now, right? So you can see here, see, Informatica Power Center Designer has 5 sub windows in it. See, source analyzer, target designer, transformation developer, and maplet designer and mapping designer. So 5 sub windows available. So let us see in each sub window what are the tasks that we can perform, right? So let's start with source analyzer, right? See, when I go to source analyzer, I have a tab by name sources, and when I go to target designer, I have a tab by name targets. Same way, transformation developer, I have transformations, and maplet developer, I have maplets, and mapping developer, I have mappings. So now let's start with source analyzer. So in source analyzer, we can define the source structure, right? So basically, in ETL process, we are going to extract the data from the source system, right? So extraction. So to extract the data, we need the structure of the source and type of the source, right? So if I want to read the data from the database, so how do I read the data from the database, right? So I should know the structure of the database, and I should know the type of the database. I should know the data types of the columns available in the table, right? So basically, I should have the structure of the table and details of the database so that I can read the data. So now there are two ways. You can directly create the structure. See, go to sources tab. You can directly create the structure. You know, you can directly create the structure and specify the database name. The database, specify the database type and other things, or you can directly connect to the database and bring the structure from the database. So in this class, let us see how we can connect to the database and bring the structure, right? So import from database. So there is a connection string created here, right, to connect to the database. So let me just create it again. So say add, select the driver of the database which you wanted to connect. So I have Oracle database installed in this machine. So I'm just selecting Oracle driver here and say finish. So give the name to the connection string. So this name can be user defined. This name can be user defined, right? So I'm just giving the database name. See, database name and data source name. So this is a connection string. This is a user defined name. But here, give the name of the database to which we need to connect to import the source structure, right? So save OK and then save OK. So now from the drop down list, select the connection string that you have connected. So to connect to the database, username and password is required, right? So let us give the username and password. So I have a user by name source where I have some tables. So let me just import the data, import the structure of the table from this particular schema. So source is the username and owner name source. So owner name is the schema name here, right? So let me just remove this owner name and just try to connect it. So when I remove the owner name and try to connect, it will try to connect to the entire database and bring all the schemas available in the database, right? So it's bringing all the schemas available in the database. If I want to connect to particular schema, I can just simply specify saying I want to connect to source schema. See, I have a source schema available here. So I can directly connect to source schema instead of, bringing all the schemas in the database. So basically owner name here is the schema name. So I have provided the username and the password. And the connection string which I have specified here has the details of the database. So I'm just connecting now, sources. So it will just display the tables and views available in this particular schema. So as of now I have only tables available in the schema. So I'll just explore it. So I have two tables available here by name EMP and DEPT, right? So let me just select EMP table here and save OK. See, this has brought the structure of the source employee table, EMP table, to the Informatica. So it has the name of the name of the table and type of the database, and it has column names, data types, length, etc. Right? So if the table might had primary and foreign keys, so you will get the table along with primary and foreign keys as well. See, I'll just show you. So you will get the structure along with primary and foreign keys as well. So as of now we don't have any primary or foreign keys available on the database, right? So this is how you will bring the structure of your source to Informatica. So using this structure you are going to read the data, right? So let me just show you the structure of the data in the database. So I'm just connecting to the same schema again with same username and password. Right. So let me just explore the database. See EMP table, right? See the structure? So the same structure is imported to the Informatica, right? So now, so this is all about source analyzer. So in source analyzer, in designer window, source analyzer window, we are going to, create or import the source structures from where we are going to read the data. And next is about target designer. So target designer is also very much similar to source analyzer. So in source analyzer we are going to create or import the source structures. In target analyzer we are going to create or import the target structures. So let's go to targets and say import. So I'll use the same connection because I'm going to see my target is available in the same database, but it's in schema by name target. So I have a schema by name target and the username password is also target. So let me just connect to that particular schema and select the table. So I'm going to select the table EMP. So EMP will have the same structure, right? So I'm just going to select the table EMP. I'll just say okay. So now it has bought the structure of table EMP. So now see, both the source and target are having same structure. So all I'm going to do in this session, so in this example is I'm just going to read the data from the source and write the data to the target. So nothing more than that. So I'm just going to move the data. So extract and load. I'm not going to do any transformation here. So extraction and loading we'll see first, and then we'll start with transformations, right? So see, both the structures of source and target is same. So now the other two windows, the transformation developer and maplet designer. So we'll discuss about this in the later classes. So right now we'll just directly move to mapping designer. So you understood, right? What is source analyzer and target designer? Source analyzer, we are going to create or import the source structures so that we can read the data from the source system. Same way, using target designer, we can create or import the target structure to load the data to the target system. So now we came to mapping designer. So before designing the mapping, let's understand what is a mapping, right? So a mapping is a graphical representation of data flow from source to the target. So it will just show you graphically how the data is being moved from source to target. So right, so let's create a mapping now. So I'll just name the mapping as m underscore dummy, because we are just going to read the data from the source and load the data to the target. See here, sources folder. See, when I create the source here, it will get saved here in the sources folder. Targets, it will get saved in the target folder, and mappings will be saved in the mappings folder, right? So if I create any transformations, it will be saved in this folder, and maplets will be saved in this folder. So all these are reusables, right? So I can use this source for n number of mappings. Same way I can use this target for n number of mappings, right? So now, so I want to read the data from the source and write it to the target, right? So let me just drag the source structure into the mapping. See, when I drag the source structure into the mapping, it will automatically come with a transformation by name source qualifier transformation, right? So this is the source definition and this is the source qualifier transformation, right? So this transformation is actually, it can read the data from the source systems, right? So this is the definition and this is the transformation which can read the data from the source systems. So let us see how it will read the data in today's session. So I am dragging the target into the mapping, and all I am going to do is, see, selecting all the columns, and I am going to drag all the columns and connect to the target. So see here, this mapping is graphically representing how the data moves from source to target. See, from here data is going to move through this transformation to the target, right? So this is a mapping which graphically represents the data flow from source to the target, right? So using Informatica designer window, we have created the source structure and we have created the target structure and we have created a mapping which moves the data from source to target, right? Source table to target table. So now let's move on to the next window, workflow manager. Right. See, workflow manager also looks very similar. So I'll just try to connect So I have connected. So I'll connect to this particular folder. See, I can double click or right click and say OK. See, right now we are in folder batch 32. So here in workflow manager also we have three sub windows available. One is task developer, and other is workload designer, and another one is workflow designer. So these are the three sub windows available. So right now let us discuss about workflow designer. So later in the later classes we'll discuss about task developer and workload designer. So in workflow designer, right, so we can design the workflow basically. So what is a workflow? Workflow is a set of jobs, right? So we can design the workflow here. So let's create the workflow. So w underscore dummy else. See, this w underscore is a naming standard, right? So I'll say w underscore dummy. So when I have created the workflow, so there is a task by name start, right? This is the start task, so which will come by default when you create the workflow, which means the work is going to start from this particular start task, right? So from here the job is going to get started, right? Okay, now I'm going to create a job in the workflow. So workflow is set of jobs, right? Set of tasks. So now I'm going to create a task here in the workflow. Say create. So I'm going to create a session task now. So session task is a task which can bound the mapping which we have created in the previous window, right? So this session can bound the mapping in it, right? And in this session we have some facility to give the source connection and target connection. We have some other properties as well, so we'll discuss in this class. So I'll say session underscore dummy create. See, when I say create, it's asking which mapping do I need to be associated with, right? So right now we have only one mapping available in this folder which we have created here. So we'll say OK. So we'll select this mapping and say OK. So every session needs a mapping for sure. The session can bound the mapping in it, right? So now this session has mapping in it, right? So I'll say right click and say edit. See, I have a mappings tab available here. We'll go to mappings tab. See, I have source qualifier and the target designer. So in the designer we have discussed, right, this source qualifier is the transformation which can read the data from the source definition. So here is the source qualifier available and this is the target, right? So basically here there is something called relational connections, right? So before seeing this, right, so sorry, so on the mapping we have created the, you know, flow, graphical flow. So how the data is going to move from source to target, right? And we have the structure of the source and structure of the target. But how does Informatica know where the source is existing and what is the name of the source and what is the name of the target, right? So Informatica should have credentials to connect to the source and to connect to the target, right? So, you know, so if it is the database sources and database target, see, go to connections, create the relational connections. So type of database Oracle, right? Oracle database, and say new, create the connection string like this. I'll say db underscore c. So I'll give the username and password. So this username and password has permissions to the entire database, and give the database name, right? See, user defined connection string name, username to connect to the database, password to connect to the database, and database name. So I have just created db underscore c is the connection name, right? So now see, we have the structure of the source and we have the structure of the target. So now here in the workflow manager we have created a connection string which has the details of the source where it has to get connected, and username and password to connect to the database, right? So it has the name of the database, username and password to connect to the database, right? So now go to the session mappings, no? On the source qualifier, just select the connection that you have created, which means for this source use this particular connection, right? So for this particular source it's going to go to database xe and give the username and password, get connected to the database and then read the data. But if it has to read the data, it should know where the table is available, right? So it may be in any schema, right? So here, if you come down, see, in the properties you have an option by name, so owner name, right? So there give the schema name. So we have bought the table from source schema, right? So give the schema name, and also you can give the table name as well. Now the details are given to the session regarding the source object. So you have given the database name in the connection string, username and password in the connection string, and you have given the schema name and the table name here. So by which Informatica can connect to the database XE using username and password provided in the connection string, and it can connect to this particular schema and read the data from this table, right? Same way give the connections to the target. So I'll just give the same connection to the target, and here also in properties you have something called table name prefix. So here the table name prefix is the schema name, so give the schema name here and the table name, right? So now you have given the details of the target. So you have given the schema name, you have given the database name, username and password in the connection string, and schema name and the table name here, so that it can connect to the correct schema and load the correct table, right? So I have saved it now. Now see, go to tasks. This is called link task. So take the link and give the link from the start task to the session. So which means, so the job executes starting from here and then starts the session, right? So now we have created a mapping, and we have created a session for the mapping and given the credentials for the in the session to connect to the source and then connect to the target, right? So now let us see how to execute the code. See, this code is now saved in the repository, right? So when we have created the code here and said control S, so which means save. See, when you say save, right? So it gets directly saved in the repository. So here also if you say save, it gets directly saved in the repository. So now let's see how to execute it. See, right click on the empty space and say start workflow, which means it's going to start the workflow. See, monitor has automatically opened and monitor is showing me the execution of this particular task. So using monitor you can see the execution of any particular task, right? So the task got succeeded, the workflow and the session both has got succeeded. Now let me see the properties. See, right click on the session and say get run properties. So it will just give you the details of the task. See, the task name, task type, when did it start and when did it end, how many records it has read and how many records it has loaded. So it has read basically 0 records. Let me just see whether the source has data in it. So it doesn't have any records in it. Let me just try to insert some data into this particular. table. So I have a script for it. Let me just check. So I'll just insert the data into the table. So right now we are connected to source schema, so we should be fine. We can directly paste the data. So let me just try to do it through Informatica, through Run SQL actually. I'll connect to source. So I have loaded the data now. Let me just verify from here whether the data is available now. So the data is available in this particular table. Now let's go to the same session and start it. So it has got succeeded. See, second time it has ran and got succeeded. And also you can see here, oh, this is the one. See, you can see here 14 records were read from the source and 14 records were loaded to the target. So before we go and see the data in the target, let us see what Informatica has done to read the data, right? See, mapping name is m underscore dummy. So this is called session log actually, right? So these are the session properties. So if you want to see the session log, right click and say get session log. Right click on the session and say get session log. Or see, you have an option here, get session log. So anything is fine. So I'll say get session log and we'll see the steps that integration service has did to run this task. See, it has written a select statement to the database to read the data. See the select statement, select source.emp.emp number. So the source, the schema name we have mentioned in the session, it has taken the schema name from the session, and the table name we have mentioned in the session, it has taken the table name from the session, and the employee name from the structure of the source, right? So it has taken the details which is provided by us and it has written the select statement to read the data from the source. So who has done it? Source qualifier transformation. So this particular transformation has given that query to the database and read the data. Same way, see, there is an insert statement given. Who has given it? See, writer thread, right? So writer instance emp, table emp has given this particular query. So what is the query? Insert data into all the columns. So values coming from the source, right? So this way, writing a select statement to the source and read the data, and writing an insert statement to the target and loading the data, right? So this way, Informatica will read the data and load the data if the source and target are databases, right? So both the tables are in database, so it has written queries to read the data and load the data. So let us see one small example now. So I just remove this column. See, I'm just selecting this particular column, hire date, and just removing it. And I have saved the mapping. So when I save the mapping, this mapping is going to get saved in the repository, right? So it's going to get saved in the repository. Now, this session doesn't know that there are changes made to the mapping, right? So we should say right click and say refresh mapping, which means it'll again refresh the repository and get the changes which are available in the repository. See, it brought the changes. Now I have saved it. So let me just execute it again. So what is the change that we have done? Removed the hire date column from the, removed the connection to the hire date column from source qualifier to the target. So it has ran for the third time. So let's say get run properties and again go to the session log and see how the query is written now. See the insert script. See, the hire date column is not available in the insert script because see to the target hire date is not connected. So if the hire date is not connected, it's unnecessary to write a statement, right? So it has removed the column from the insert statement. Same way, see the select statement here. It did not write the hire date column in the select statement because see it's not the column is not taken out, the value of the column is not taken out, so it's unnecessary to write the select statement in this case as well, right? So this way Informatica will read the data and write the data. So we have ran it multiple times. Let me just truncate the target table so that there is no data in it, and we'll see the data table em. So I have truncated the table now. So let me just start the session. So it has ran again and read 14 records and loaded 14 records. So let me just show you the data in the target. So before that, let me just set this layout so that we can see the data correctly. So select star from em. So we are connected to the target schema, right? So now we have data available in the MB table. So let's run it once again and see. I'm just truncating the table again and executing the same query, no data available. And now let me just start the workflow. So it got succeeded. So let's see the output. So there is output. So which means it has read the data and loaded the data to the table. So right now in this dummy mapping, what we have done is we have read the data from EMP table from source schema and loaded the data to the EMP table which is available in target schema, right? So this is just an introduction to the Informatica tools, Informatica client tools basically, right? So in the next class we'll try to see try to use the transformations in the mapping, right? So just practice this session. So I want all of you to practice this session so that tomorrow's session will be more interactive, right? So I want you to come back with the questions, right? So thank you all. We'll meet tomorrow.